Hi. I'm in a really interesting position because I'm a privacy guy. I've been working in privacy for a long time. I'm also a computer scientist and have a background in psychology and sociology as well. So my day job is working with companies to help them understand how to develop solutions which enhance the privacy rights of individuals using their services. It's a job I really enjoy. It's a job I'm really good at. I'm also an abuse survivor. Um, who survived some really horrific abuse as a child. And for me, when it comes to privacy, this isn't just about me doing my job. This is something which is incredibly personal. And the reason I do what I do instead of just working in tech is because it's so incredibly personal and it's such an important thing for society in order to maintain the freedoms that we expect and have used for so long now. I remember when I gave my first privacy speech in London back in 2008. And at the end of my speech, an elderly gentleman stood up in his army uniform and said that, if we give up privacy, all the people who he fought with in the Second World War, all his friends, families, brothers who died to give us these fundamental rights, did it for nothing. We're basically disgracing their sacrifice by giving these things up. And I think that's really one of the most poignant things to me and sits with me to this day and will sit with me for the rest of my life and motivates me to do the work that I do. Because when we give up privacy, we don't just give up privacy. We give up all of the other freedoms which rely on it. Freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of opinion, everything that we do, freedom of thought, all the things that we take for granted, the things which we need to live in a democratic society, the things which make us innovative, the things which allow us to have self-awareness and self-identity and autonomy. All of these things rely on the ability to have privacy, because as soon as you lose privacy, you diminish the ability to have all of these other freedoms. This is incredibly important. And we don't want to live in a world where people don't have autonomy. Because if we live in a world where people don't have autonomy, we live in a world without innovation, because people no longer think for themselves. They do everything they're told to do. So we don't move forward as a society. We don't move forward as a species. The other thing which concerns me when we're talking about end-to-end encryption and the introduction of weaknesses or backdoors, etc., is it really doesn't move forward the discussion. It doesn't prevent the bad guys from doing bad things. They'll do bad things regardless. They'll go to different platforms. They'll use different technologies which are less easy to infiltrate, and they will still do the things that they do. My psychology teacher said to me when I was in university, he said, because I was struggling at the time, I was working on a thesis related to child sexual abuse and trafficking of child pornography online. And he said to me, what would you do if you saw a child floating down the river, drowning in the river? I said, well, I'd jump in and I'd try and save the child. And he said to me, well, what if you see another child 5 minutes later, and then another child 3 minutes later, and then the children just keep coming? I said, well, I'd try and save all the children. He said, but it would be impossible. I said, yeah, but I would do whatever I could. And this is really the mindset of the people who are pushing for, the changes to these laws in relation to the confidentiality of our communications. What my psychology professor said to me then was, well, wouldn't it make more sense to go up the river and find out how the children have fallen in the river in the first place? And this is the solutions that we need to be considering. We need to be looking at why people do these terrible things in the first place and trying to prevent them from occurring in the first place, rather than dealing with the consequences, the disastrous consequences as they may be, and focusing on that instead. So instead of focusing on weakening communication, confidentiality of communications, we should be spending more money doing more research, which is woefully lacking in this space, on the reasons why people offend in this way in the first place, on how we can change the culture and society which has existed for hundreds of years. The abuse of children is not something which is new. It's just something which is much easier to report on nowadays. So why do we do this? What can we do to fix this and prevent this from happening in the first place? And then even if we don't manage to find a solution, there are other ways that we can help deal with the consequences without compromising on the confidentiality of our communications. There are modern technologies and modern techniques, such as, for example, homomorphic encryption, which would allow for the inspection of communications to detect this type of abuse without undermining the encryption and the confidentiality of those communications. So going down the route where we weaken the security, which has been discussed already by the previous two speakers, to the point where it is impossible to determine who is going to be able to access those weaknesses. It is impossible to prevent bad actors from using those weaknesses. So instead of moving down a path which has a zero-sum situation for us, why don't we move to a more positive sum situation where we deal with the issues at the core, try and research and discover how we can fix these inherent social problems in the first place, and use modern technologies and modern techniques which do not require us to compromise on the confidentiality and the privacy of our communications. Because if we don't do that, we will find in a few generations' time that we do not have autonomy anymore. There is no trust. There is no freedom. Everybody is just a cog in the machine. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.